I guess we're going to go ahead and get started then. Welcome everyone to this panel discussion on housing equity in the Knoxville community. I'm so pleased to have this great panel of experts here to talk about the issues in Knoxville. This event is being co-sponsored by the Knoxville Area Urban League. Thank you, Terrence Carter, Felix Harris, Linda Reed, for all of your magnificent and amazing support, as well as the College of Social Work at the University of Tennessee and the Division of Diversity and Engagement within the university. So our focus tonight is really on housing equity, the end of the COVID-related eviction moratorium. As we know, that ended. There was an end to the national moratorium, and the state of Tennessee decided to enforce the end of that eviction moratorium. And so we want to talk about what is the impact of that end on Knoxville residents who are most vulnerable to losing their homes, and then talk about what we as a city are doing right now to address and mitigate any negative impacts, as well as what we can do in terms of innovative thinking out of the box, and next steps to make sure that we keep Knoxvillians housed. So we've got 6 experts here tonight to talk about the issues, and they represent a variety of aspects on the issue. And I'm just going to introduce people following my screen. I have J.D. Jackson, who is the Chief Operating Officer of SEED here in Knoxville. I've got Misty Goodwin, who is the Director of Social Services at CAC. Christina Caceres, who is the Director of, hold on just a second, let me get my notes, who is the Director of Community Resources at Centro Hispano. We have Jenny Holden, who is representing Knox County. She's the Director of Community Development. And then finally, Mike Dunthorne, who is with the City of Knoxville and who is the Homeless Programs Coordinator. So I'm just going to start with our first question and give everyone a chance to respond to the degree that they want to respond. And we're going to go through these 5 questions and let everyone talk about the issues. If you have questions in the audience, you can type them into the chat. We have a moderator who's handling the chat. And at the end, if we have time, we'll propose some of the key questions back to the panelists to see if they can talk more about issues that the audience members have raised. We're also putting in the Facebook chat a link to just a really quick Qualtrics survey. It's actually not really a survey. If you are interested in continuing this conversation, oh my goodness, I forgot. Yolanda's right in the center of my screen. I can't believe I overlooked our key panelist, Yolanda Grant. She is the United Way of Greater Knoxville Housing Navigator Lead. She's really the boots on the ground here in this conversation. So I am deeply sorry for missing you, Yolanda. And she can really speak most directly to the human experience of persons trying to keep their houses and find housing in Knoxville. Okay, so back to the format. So we're going to have a chat function where you can enter in for questions to the panelists, and then we'll compile all those questions at the end, and we'll send those around to the panelists at the after the event. And we'll also and try to get answers for everyone, but we'll also see if we have time to propose a few questions live to the panelists. And then if you are interested in continuing the conversation or receiving further information about the topic, we've created a Qualtrics link where you can just leave your name and contact information or any final thoughts that you have about the issue. That's totally optional. You don't need to do that if you don't want to leave your contact information. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So for those members of the audience who are listening who might be unfamiliar with the topic of evictions, and housing insecurity, we were hoping that you all could talk a little bit about the scope of housing security in Knoxville. What's the prevalence? Who is most at risk? Do we see geographic random distribution of that type of insecurity, or is it more prevalent in certain parts of our community, et cetera?
Would you like to start?
Whoever wants to jump in.
Well, I'll just give a couple of top line thoughts about that. The scope of housing insecurity is something that really predated the pandemic. Affordable housing has been a big problem here and across the country for a long time. It's, somebody who's making minimum wage doesn't make enough to pay the rent. And so there's already a need for a lot of help to keep people housed. There's also just not enough units, whether you're talking about owner occupied or rental units available for people to live in. So all that existed already. And then you throw on top of that the pandemic, where we went last year through lockdown, and then a lot of job sectors, people lost their jobs, they couldn't go to work, and you create the situation I think we're going to be talking a lot about here today, where folks just simply weren't able to pay their rent, and we fortunately here we're able to stand up some resources to help with that. That doesn't mean the crisis is over or gone, but there's been a lot of work to help with that. So that's my start, and I'll let somebody else pick it up from there.
Yeah, I would like to piggyback with what you said, Michael, especially in the community of color. I mean, if Main Street gets a sniffle, well, the community of color is got pneumonia. So what's happening in communities is due to COVID and inadequate housing right now. There's such a loss of opportunity for people to achieve home ownership or renting a house or apartment. The problem is it stems from basically being the number one poverty with minorities or blacks, at 42%. So automatically you're behind the 8 ball there. And like I said, throw COVID on it, and being without jobs and lack of jobs and this and that is understandable to see the insecurities that are in the communities of color right now. And plus, you look at Knoxville being such a hot market. I think their housing has increased 21% as far as appraisal values in houses. And right now, they're getting 7% of houses are bringing over retail value for these homes. So you got a scarcity of houses, and the people that really can't afford to get in these houses or any house are just looking for answers. And like I said, it's like a double-edged sword. Not only do they get evicted, but now their credit is messed up. So it's even harder to obtain home ownership, any kind of rent anywhere else, because you got bad credit. So it's just like it's getting worse and worse as it goes on. Now, well, I'll talk about it later, what we're trying to do along with Knox County, but I just wanted to start with that.
I'll just jump in and add to JD's statistics that, we've got over 48,000 households in Knox County that are considered housing cost burdened. And I would say that number is actually higher now with the increase in rent rates. And when, you're talking about housing cost burden, that's spending 30% or more of your income on housing. When for a low to moderate income family, any change in your income, any reduction is going to make it next to impossible for you to make those rent payments when 30% of your income is already going. So the pandemic has made what, like Michael said, what was already a bad situation much worse.
And I can add to that, especially looking at growing Latino community, looking at those additional barriers. Of course, language is a huge barrier, just simply not understanding the rules or not even having access to those rules and understanding what's available. Then all the paperwork, like we were talking about bad credit, what about no credit? And no having that document. I mean, this is not a competition, of course, but it's just looking at all of the different variables. And I can speak to that, like from personal experience, like coming to this country, moving right here, right before pandemic. And then it's like, how are you going to rent something where you're just like a new person? And like, there's no story, there's no nothing. I'm just fortunate that I'm bilingual already. So I think looking at all those barriers really help understand. But of course, the lack of affordable housing, that just frames the whole conversation already.
And I would just add, this is Misty Goodwin with CAC. I would add, what we see certainly is just families and individuals who were already struggling due to backgrounds or poor credit or just living in poverty and not being able to have the income that it takes to qualify. But because of the shortage of housing, landlords they really kind of have the cream of the crop at their fingertips because people are desperate for housing. So there's no longer this need to take chances on others. And so that's hurt a lot with certainly some of the lower income folks that we see and those that are homeless and just rehousing. That's hitting hard, and certainly the lack of landlords that are willing to participate in Section 8. Again, because of the market, there's, right now, not a lot of incentive for them to do that. And so that's something we'll talk about soon and what we're kind of doing to be creative along those lines. But it's difficult. It's a struggle right now.
And then I guess I would like to say, if you kind of look at percentages wise, somewhere between 98 and 99% of all units that are available are already occupied. So that's just like Misty was saying, leaving no room, as everybody was saying, with very little options for anybody to, even if they even wanted to with credit, even bad credit, you can kind of work around that a little bit. But also, people may want to be interested in maybe take a look at the CAR report, the Knoxville Area Association of Realtors. It kind of gives some of those stats that some of the panelists here were just talking about: Blacks, Hispanic, Asians, renters, homeowners, and why those things kind of exist, as we all know, before this pandemic. So it just added to this world of tornado that has already was existing. So that's what we're here to try to figure out and solve and see what we can come up with and do our best.
Thank you to all of you for that information, those statistics, those resources to check out. So I'm curious, and some of you have sort of touched on this, do you think that COVID has made people more vulnerable to losing their homes? Not necessarily, so not the end of the eviction moratorium, but COVID in and of itself, have you seen that have an impact on people's ability to stay housed?
I could take that one. I absolutely. Yeah. So we are seeing, and certainly this is getting better, but in the very beginning of the pandemic, which some people have, not caught up from 2020 when everything shut down and they lost their jobs, and some have gone back to work, but they still have that debt owed. Some have been with the schools back in session now that are just quarantined to be home with their kids for the week and had to miss that week of work and don't have a bank of annual leave or sick leave. And that's just people living paycheck to paycheck. That's been certainly a hardship. Those that are caregiving for seniors, I know myself, I'm a caregiver for my mother. That's my other sort of full-time job, and it's been difficult to keep caregivers in with her. So I've had to, fill in and try to work full-time. And I know that I'm certainly not the only one out there. And luckily I have a job with sick leave and that I can use, as needed, but many don't have that. Many are working just hourly jobs that they can't skip work, they can't miss work. And if quarantine happens, that's 2 weeks, 10 days without work. And so it can really set people back, both on rent and mortgage holders as well. And so, and for those who have actually had COVID, which we've had applications for assistance on a lot of folks that have had COVID themselves, that's been, obviously longer than 2 weeks for some people who have really struggled and been in the hospital with it.
I'll just briefly add to that, what you're hearing from Misty and JD and everybody is there are so many pieces of the puzzle that people have in front of them as challenges, and any one thing can then create a cascading effect where if COVID is an issue and you lose those 10 days of work, or you need a caregiver for a family member, but you can't get the caregiver, so you can't go. Any one piece of the puzzle that gets thrown out of whack can then have a cascading effect that causes other things to go wrong. And so when you have people that, again, without the pandemic, were already on the edge and struggling, and then you add not a small thing, we've all been living through this, not a small thing. On top of it, it creates a huge problem for people who were already living on the edge.
Yeah, to jump. Yes,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
So not to keep kind of piggybacking, but when you asked that question, it really depended on what your wages were, how much you made, what education you had, what skills you had, kind of determines how COVID really affected you. So if you were more of a lower wage paying or hourly paid individual, let me kind of say it more that way, it hit you hard from your minimum wage all the way up even to $12 to $15 an hour. That sounds very good, but as Misty just says, if you miss that 1 day or 2 days or 10 days and your rent doesn't change because of the number of hours you have worked and money you have made, that's how people also as well get behind. But to add to that, it's also part of this systemic injustice that makes it hard for individuals to get ahead or to keep them actually where they are at. So as Mike and everybody say, it's just not really one thing. It's just this combinations, but you're definitely going to hear some of the same words used, like wages. Those are always going to forefront most of this because we all know that makes a difference on how much you make and earn a year.
Yeah, and what I was going to say, Yolanda, if you're going, like I said, paycheck to paycheck, but how about if you're not even getting a paycheck? So you can't get the paycheck anymore. So it's definitely have a very, very diverse, I mean, not diverse, but adverse effect on people just trying to just stay up, keep their head afloat, you know, without life preservers or very few life preservers.
And we forgot about the fixed income.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, yeah. So.
I just want to jump in too and just add that, you know, when we've looked at the applications for emergency rental assistance, there were so many families that were able to keep up with their rent through their savings and all of that. And then about November last year, it was gone. And that's where we've seen, you know, that's the conversations that we have had to have with applicants that say, oh, I just need one single month of help. But they've spent everything that they'd worked so hard to save. And we're like, no, let us help you longer so you can get back to where you were before. Because a family, you know, everybody needs a cushion if they can have it. And there have been so many applicants that we have talked to that absolutely, you know, did everything they can, had 2 and 3 jobs to try and make their rent payments, and were able to hobble along until sort of the end of last year. And it's been humbling to just listen to people's stories and to see the number of people that are working many jobs in many hours trying to cobble together what they were making prior to the pandemic.
Yeah, and I think just to add on that, yeah, indeed, everybody has been affected, but of course we have seen how this has accentuated the inequalities and the already existing differences. A lot of the times even, and I see there's been a lot of different efforts from like federal level to like just very grassroots initiative, but particularly in the Latino or Hispanic population, also looking at a lot of people not applying to these programs, again, for the same similar reasons, or also because there was just this fear, because something that happened that maybe is not something that is so discussed in this sort of panels, but it's like at the same time that the pandemic started, there's this huge thing that was called public charge rule that affected so many people, and not necessarily because they were going through an immigration process, but maybe they were being sponsored for a cousin or for someone else. So them being able to access those support programs that are precisely put in place so that these situations don't happen, they were just scared that this was going to eventually backfire. So even like with the little resources that existed, but they were put in place to keep people from preventing evictions, there were still a lot of barriers on other sides that if we're not looking at all these different variables, we're not able to make these informed decisions where it comes to designing policies. So I think that's also an added sort of barrier and how COVID impacted our community in a different way.
And I would add to that, Christina, one of the things we saw in the early days back in March of 2020 was we had, I had a direct partnership and relationship with the health department. And so many of the people who tested positive were from the minority communities. Certainly Kurundi, the Hispanic community, where they didn't even understand really what COVID was and about the vaccinations. And so there were so many that tested positive during that time frame because they didn't really get connected as they should have. And so I know quickly we were able to turn and hire a couple people to our staff, that one who speaks Spanish and another who speaks Kurundi, to just get connected to those communities. To be sure, we were able to educate and get them connected to the resources. But that just, and that's just those two communities. But there were many minority communities certainly that were impacted there, that we heard about and tried to do everything we could to get connected. So
yeah, and I understand what everybody was trying to do, just catch up and figure out how to move forward. But then always, and I think this is awesome about having the opportunity to have different institutions at different levels, very grassroots, but also people in the policy part, because then you get all these places where you are able to look and see what's happening around. And I think this is great. And this is part of, and I know this is already the next question. So I think maybe this is a good way of entering there.
Sure, absolutely. If you all want to start talking a little bit about specifically the end of the eviction moratorium, please. Go for it, Christina.
Well, I realized I meant the fourth question. That was not the best introduction to the third one. So please, someone else can join. My bad.
No, you're fine. Well, so
I can just speak a little bit about on the eviction moratorium.
Yes, please save me, Jenny.
I will save you. So for us, running the emergency rental assistance program, obviously the eviction moratorium, when it was in place, it gave us a little, there were still people being evicted throughout the moratorium, but that moratorium in place gave us a little breathing room as we built this program. So as we ran into that deadline, that was going to be lifted, that was for us, it was a real moment of we've got to be able to get these payments out faster. And thank God for all of our partners here who have Misty Goodwin, who has spent the last 6 months slaving away trying to figure out how to make these payments faster. But the eviction moratorium really took the landlords that had taken that seriously and had kept people housed. Some of those landlords had not been paid in a year. And once that moratorium was lifted, they absolutely started eviction proceedings, and being able to make emergency rental payments for tenants in time to keep them stably housed is the core of what we do. So it absolutely made a difficult situation harder, because we did have a large number of landlords that did follow the CDC's guidelines and were not evicting people previously. But at some point, landlords also run into that issue of they can't make their payments if they're not getting rental payments. And so good landlords even were having to move forward with that. So it has made a difficult situation harder.
So I will say that it definitely increased homelessness, and it's definitely going to increase homeless families living more with with other family members. Those homeless families also are going to be living with friends. I feel there'll be more of a growing population of couch homeless as opposed to more of your street homeless, though. But what ended up happening is, just as Jenny said, that they couldn't make their own mortgage payments either. So what they did was sort of found a loophole, and most of you all know this. They just started selling their homes to get out and to avoid evictions. And this is what also is increasing this homelessness, that we get calls every day about landlords selling this, and what can I do here? Or I got a voucher, and but they're selling the place. Or once septic tanks go bad, they're not repairing. And so the landlords as well got a little smart and hip to this too. So it's not helping the situation by them doing that, but at the same time, it is their property, because I'm one of those individuals or agencies that I'm on both sides. I see the direct side of the clients. I hear the stories. I walk and hold the hands with the case manager, but at the same time, I'm over here with the CD and directors and the landlords, and trying to pacify and trying to hear and link those two together. So sometimes you may hear me kind of straddle both sides of the fence, but it's the reality of it, and we have to face that reality. And once we, do, like I always say, then we can definitely always move forward. Be transparent.
And I would add, Yolanda, that's exactly correct. I mean, we had a lot of landlords that just decided not to renew leases, either to sell or just not to renew the lease. And so that was sort of their backdoor way of getting out. And so the result of that, ended with some families doubling up with others, moving in with relatives. We've also seen an increase in the number of families living in hotels that are asking for assistance with that and trying to get connected to rehousing services. And so, yeah, absolutely. I will say, Jenny and her team has done a great job too with just working with the mediators in the courts now that the moratorium has ended, to be sure that people are getting connected to the rental assistance program, and that we're trying to work those cases as fast as we can to really, give us a little more time. It did take us a minute to get the rental assistance program up and running, and we were literally flying the plane as we built it. And I think we're trying to just catch our breath and get staffed up. But in the meantime, I have to say, Jenny and her team have done a great job with just circling up with the courts and trying to make those partnerships so we can get people, again, just connected to the assistance.
And I'm going to act as a quick segue, because I think there's an important point that we need to make sure this message gets out. But yeah, first, Misty, you weren't only building the plane as it's flying along, but you were actually moving from one plane that was funded through the city and the block grant programs and the emergency solutions grant programs that kind of got started. And then as the county received their funds and we're building this much larger program, you and others were kind of switching planes in midair and making all that work. And I think it's a credit to you and to the others in our community who were already kind of ready to go and figure all this stuff out as everything started to spin apart over a year ago. And then the segue that I wanted to kind of make was to kick it over to Jenny, specifically that issue about the courts, because I think it's incredibly important for people to hear that even if they get an eviction notice, they need to go to their court date. And I'll let Jenny explain why.
That actually was on my list for the next one too. First, just let me say that this truly has been, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program has been a group effort by all the nonprofit agencies, the city and the county. What Misty said about building the plane as we were flying it is 100% true, and none of us could have done this alone. I mean, we've all worked together through the whole thing. Some things have gone beautifully, some things have been rough, but we feel like we're in a good, stable place now. But for the eviction court question, it is extremely important for tenants to understand that if they are scheduled to be in court for an eviction proceeding, that they need to attend. And sometimes that's scary. We've actually started, Carter Hall from the city of Knoxville came up with this great idea of sending postcards out to anyone who's gotten a detainer warrant for an eviction proceeding, to let them know about the Emergency Rental Assistance Program and to let them know how important it is for them to either appear in court or to call the court to reschedule their court date. If you don't come to court as a tenant, there will be a default judgment and the eviction will proceed. If you come to court, we have personnel that work outside the courtroom for during every court, every day that eviction court is in session. And then also we do have contracts in place with community mediation and legal aid, where they can provide legal services to help people mediate between landlords and tenants. One of the things that JD had mentioned that is a massive problem for tenants, sometimes a landlord is going to evict no matter what we do, but we also have the ability to go ahead and pay that payment so that the tenant, we can do a settlement with the landlord to keep the tenant from having that eviction follow them or have that large debt follow them, so that then they can't get another place to live. So we've got some eviction protection programs. We're big on eviction prevention. We 100% want to try and keep people housed where they are. It's the best and easiest way to do it. But there are times that's just not going to be a possibility. But we are also working to try and mitigate those long-term issues of folks that are going to have these large judgments against them where they can't find another place to live. So yes, thank you, Mike. It is very important if you have a court date for you just to come. Most of the time that we can hold that date so that if you haven't applied, you can apply, or that if you've applied but your application hasn't been through the process, that we can get that done.
Jenny, can I ask you a question? So is there a standard date that, say if eviction is upheld, is there a standard date that everyone gets, like 10 days, everybody gonna get 15 days, 20 days, 30
That
days?
is an excellent question that I actually just asked the same thing
Okay.
to a legal aid attorney, because I had the same question. I was like, and there are standards, but there are different, there are different dates. I thought, originally I was like, everybody gets 30 days. That's not true.
Right.
It's based on, why you're being evicted. And so sometimes what we are doing, if an eviction is going to take place, no matter what we do, sometimes what we do is try and work with the landlord to give the tenant longer for them to stay in the unit. Let us make a payment and let them stay until the end of the month so that they have longer to find someplace else. But
Okay.
It is standard, but it's not like a single standard date.
Yes,
Like
I was just thinking that
days.
maybe, yes, I was just thinking maybe for these particular cases that's going through this, eviction, this while we're in the pandemic, that the judge or somebody may have decided, we'll just give everybody 20 days but okay. Okay, thank you.
Christina, did you have something to follow up on this? I think what we're talking about at this point is what's being done in Knoxville right now to support the housing for individuals who might be vulnerable to this eviction moratorium ending. I thought at one point you were segueing to that question.
Yeah, well, I think a lot has been already said, but I think having this type of task forces and sharing that information and just being very transparent. I met Jenny almost as soon as I started working at Centro, and we were like, hey, a lot of the programs that we were trying to do with our community was not necessarily having that response that we expected. So we were really looking at why isn't that is working out. And then we were just thrilled to get the opportunity to join EDA. I think it's a wonderful program, and that has that flexibility that a lot of the times that we need, and we advocate for that to really respond to the application, to also respond to the characteristic of our community specifically. And having that possibility, I think just the fact that I'm already being from Centro Hispano in this conversation, as an expert, I think that's already shows a lot of the type of efforts and that sort of let's brainstorm together and include and everybody be giving a seat in the table. So I think in the spirit of that, because maybe a lot of the legal terms and all that, they're also new to me, but also understanding and just really listening to the community and being the type of situations that they're coming specifically to us in our helpline, and really knowing what is it that we need to do, and having the chance to just get on the phone and be like, hey, this is happening. Is there something available? And then all of a sudden Ada appear, and here we are, and now I'm in this panel. So yeah, I'm just excited to have the chance of keep this conversation going, and keep just kind of questioning and trying to push the limits on what is happening, but always also looking at it in the whole picture, in the whole context. And I believe this was already said also, as not only throughout COVID, but this is already an existing issue. So considering that also towards the future, and especially when it comes to policy making.
Well, I would like to start in and tackle some of this question number 4. What Knox County is doing with Jenny supervision is getting the word out. I mean, we have such an overwhelming response to all the people in our community that are coming up and trying to find out what do I need to do to get caught up and get my rent paid or this and that. And it was almost like they was at their wits' end because a lot of them was close to facing, eviction and stuff like that. So what is being done right now, we are boots on the ground, knocking on the doors, getting people to come to the C building. We'll help them fill out the paperwork or the online process to get them registered and this and that. And that's really has made a difference, I think, from what I see in the amount of support that I'm getting from the community saying, man, I wish it was around earlier, So I want to thank Jenny again and her crew.
All right, I just got to jump in and say, I appreciate that's very kind. However, the folks that I just a little bit of an overview on the rental assistance program. We have paid out so far about $8 million in emergency rental assistance and utility payments to about 2,300 families or households in Knoxville and Knox County, which we still have about 33 million actually to go. So we still have a lot of funding in this program that we can help keep low to moderate income renter households housed. And then we also have our nonprofit partners that are providing housing stability services. And like what JD is talking about is SEED, they're going door to door and letting people know about the program and sometimes helping people apply right on their porch because they've got iPads and they sit down and just help somebody apply. And Christina, when we first had the conversation about Centro working with us, and she explained to me why that just having the application available in Spanish is not enough, that people need a place that they can go and that they can talk to someone who will explain to them, hey, this is what you need to apply right now. And when you apply in 3 months, if you can keep this paperwork, that's going to make it easier. And Misty and her crew, Urban League has computers available that anyone in the community can come. We've got a long list of partner agencies, and they're the ones that are boots on the ground. Actually, we provide the funding and we do everything we can to help. But these are the folks that are doing the actual day-to-day, sitting down with people and helping them. Legal aid, community mediation, they're working tirelessly to help people who need legal assistance. We have Compassion Coalition, Home Source of East Tennessee, United Way. I'm sure I'm going to forget someone, but all of these partner agencies, they really are the ones that are making it possible for us to do this work. Volunteer Ministry Center, we've got agencies that are providing, they're going out with tenants who have lost their housing and helping them make their deposits and helping them pay their first month's rent to get them moved into someplace new. When we can find someplace new, like Yolanda said, that's a massive issue. But the partner agencies are the ones that are doing the work. So it's the JDs and all of you that are really making the difference in this program.
Thank you, Jenny. So this is our last question, and I kind of want to bring some things together. What we want to know is, what are some ideas about what we can do further to reduce the impact? And so I think within that question, I've heard a lot about working on the tenant side, helping people get the funds to stay housed and eviction prevention. But I remember at the beginning of the conversation, you all were talking about the landlord side of the issue. So the market is so tight that they have kind of all the power, and they don't feel beholden to keeping tenants housed if they don't want to. And they can sell their houses if they want to because the market's tight is so hot. So that's one of the things I'm curious about in terms of what we could be doing, is thinking about on the landlord side of things, how to get landlords to.
So that's actually what we're doing. House Knox has actually October the 27th. We sent out invites to landlords from all various stages, private owned, property managers, and we're just going to do a roundtable, kind of get together, chit chat, talk about their needs, what do they see, what would they like as far as in tenants, as far as in case management. We also going to talk about different projects and maybe becoming an association and just letting them know about voucher programs and kind of how that works. Just kind of educate them a little bit on some HUD things and how to calculate rent, just all kind of educational things, and wanting to hear their side as to what it is that can kind of narrow that gap. Because one thing that we have learned is that we say affordable housing a lot, but affordable housing means different term depends upon your income. So say for instance, you may have a bedroom unit that rents for $900 for one bedroom. Well, that may be affordable if your income gross is $2,700, $3,200 a month. But if your income is only $700, $1,500 a month, that $900 bedroom is not necessarily affordable. So sometimes when developers and people are kicking around terms of affordable, really, who are they really targeting and who do they really mean? Because to actually have affordable rent, it really should just only be based upon 30% of your income. That's affordable. Or you can have 2 times the rent amount. So say for instance, the rent may be $700 and your gross income may need to be 2 times that, $1,400. That's affordable for someone in that income bracket. So sometimes I tell people be a little careful with that, but we are going to be hosting several roundtables with different varieties of people from all sorts of renting, so we can kind of narrow that gap and see can they, stop some of those things that they are doing, which is selling those properties or holding off on some of those evictions, because there are monies out there for those individuals.
If I can add something.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Yes, please, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just want to say, Yolanda, when you mentioned that you kind of like saw both parts, I thought that's great, because I think it is super important to involve landlords in the conversation, so that I think a lot of the times, or at least how I perceive it, this is framed as like a zero-sum game, where like if you're working towards helping the tenant, then automatically the landlord's going to be damaged. So I think especially considering, people might just be a victim because they can't afford to pay their mortgage, and then they're the ones that are going to be. So just looking at all those parts of the puzzle, I think it's great. And just getting all that information, because then if you also understand the needs, of course, then you can create programs that respond to those and maybe some incentives there. So yeah, that's great.
Yes.
I would love to hear more about it.
Yes.
So I was just going to say that to tag on to what Yolanda was saying, is it really is incredibly important to work with the folks who have property now, figure out what their needs are, figure out how we can facilitate both keeping people housed, and certainly the other half of the work is when we have people who've lost their housing, what we can do to work with them to get folks in and supported, take down some of the risk for landlords to accept people who have been troubled, and try to get folks into housing if we're not able to keep them there in the first place. Another piece of the puzzle is getting simply more units available. The city has an affordable rental development fund that it has been using to help incentivize to fill the gaps in funding for developers who will build housing that is designed specifically to meet those rent affordableness thresholds that Yolanda was talking about, so that as those properties get built, you get more units on the market. If we can get a lot more units on the market, then that starts to have some effect, I hope, on the price. We're a ways away before we can have that level of an effect, but getting the units available and then working with those landlords so that they're in the pipeline and working with all of the folks here at the table that can work with their tenants and make sure they stay housed, and for those who need it, get housed.
And I just want to follow up with the landlord issue and say that we have had some incredible landlords. Misty can talk about this too, but the number of landlords that have called and advocated for their tenants and, have jumped through whatever that was required to get their tenants assisted. And, no matter what paperwork that we might need, which that's gotten a lot better as the program is going on, but we've had some landlords that have really absolutely been the biggest advocates to help their individual tenants. I mean, we just had a landlord yesterday that called and said, what do you need? We have landlords that call and say, my tenant that, she just had a baby, she needs help right now. So we have seen good and bad, but we've got some great landlords in Knoxville and Knox County. And a lot of times they just really need these payments so that they can keep those, because what Yolanda said is 100%. We see that all the time where landlords have had to sell, and then the new landlord comes in and rents increase by sometimes more than 50%. And a low to moderate income family is not going to be able to take that on. They're just not going to be able to cover that increase. But I do want to say we've got some great landlords that have been really, really good partners to us in this.
I know we're over time, so just any concluding thoughts about what we could do in the future, innovations, new ideas that could further sort of mitigate impact, keep people housed? Anything that we're not doing that you'd love to see us doing?
Well, I'll just kind of, this is a little bit broad, but at the beginning of the conversation here, I remarked on how we had folks, we had needs already in the community that are made worse by COVID. We also have had agencies and organizations, the people that we've been talking to today and others, who were already primed and working together and able to step up and meet the challenge throughout the past year and a half. I was talking about this a few months ago, that as things seemed like they were settling down, let's make sure we learn from things that we did as we really worked so hard to step up our game in responding to folks' needs. And then Delta hit us again. But hopefully we're on the back end of that now. And so we need to make sure that we learn from all of the work that we've been doing over the last year and a half. The new things that we have done, the things where we've built things when we didn't know we had the capacity to do it, but we've created resources to respond to folks' needs. The crisis for folks in housing existed before, and it will continue even if the COVID numbers just disappear. Let's hope they do. And so let's use the things that we've learned working together through this process to apply those when we just have the normal level of crisis for people and their needs in housing.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Mike. Any other closing thoughts?
The only thing that I might add is that, and I think Misty and I have talked about this, and Christina and I have talked about this as well, is just the more information we can get about smaller landlords. It's really hard, and we have a ton of low to moderate income families that don't have vouchers, but they just need to be able to find an affordable unit that is, less than $900 a month. If we could work together to expand and continue to create this list that we've all been working towards, so that it includes any units, not just, we've got folks that own a single piece of property, and it's hard when if you go online and trying to find a rental unit, you can't find those unless you're doing Facebook or Zillow, and then there's a lot of scams and people are concerned about that. So I think there's room for us to continue to work together and build a list of all of our landlords, whether they be big or small, that have rental units that are affordable for low to moderate income families. And I think there are more than any of us knew until, as we start doing this program and we start seeing more and more landlords that none of us have ever heard of. I think this is an opportunity to start really trying to build a more comprehensive list of what we have available, so that we can help people when they are looking for those affordable units.
It's a great idea, Jenny.
Yeah, so off of that, you know, when she mentioned the landlord list, a lot of those what new landlords that she said that come aboard is from out of town, because we get a lot of out of state individuals buying up properties in our city, and then they take and set prices what they want because they're their prices, which then it makes things really hard for us as a city and as a community to keep things within our own instead of keep allowing outsiders to continue buying properties. So one thing our team does sometimes is do some searches, and we came across this search in a project called, I'm gonna have to kind of read off of this a little because it's kind of a lot, called NOAA's. And NOAA stands for Naturally Occurring Affordable Housing. And what that actually means in short term is that, let's say an individual will buy a property with the intent for that property to be a rental property. They will fix up that property, but here's where it gets very nice and tricky and very unique, is that what they'll do is they'll keep that property affordable rent on a 20-year deed, which allows restrictions that places legal rules on how that property can be used and how that property can be priced. So say, for instance, if that property was to sell over to or switch over to someone, they will have to follow these restrictions that has been placed on these deeds to keep this unit and property affordable for 20 years. And that's something that we kind of thought was kind of neat and creative, that if we could get in and be able to buy properties and set up some of these restrictions within our own communities, then that would keep affordable housing within our own communities and not allowing a lot of outsiders buying up those units and making profits. Do you kind of get where I'm going? So yes, that's my last comment.
Thank you, Yolanda.
You're welcome.
Good points as well. I really appreciate everyone's time today or tonight. I know we're way over. So I also, unfortunately, we were not able to go live tonight. That's my understanding from the Urban Link. So as soon as we, and I'm just sending everyone as soon as we have the recording, we'll be posting that as many outlets as possible, because it's pretty amazing to me how much information you all have shared and your investment in the issues, and the fact that this just really needs to be disseminated as widely as possible. And one thing that really struck me is just the teamwork and the camaraderie amongst individuals who are working on keeping people housed in Knoxville. And I think, as you all emphasize, that's really a critical component and an overlooked component sometimes of success really in a community, is community collaboration. So thank you so much for your time tonight. I will be. Could I
ask you to do me a favor when you post this? Would you also post knoxhousingassistance.org? We never said it. People need to know where they can go to access this program. Yes. Would you somewhere put that knoxhousingassistance.org is the place to go for help? Because we would love to get that word out.
Absolutely. I got it.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much, and have a wonderful evening. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Nice meeting you.
Same here.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.